The paradox of identity presents one of philosophy's most enduring puzzles. What makes you the same person throughout your life? Is a river still the same river if all its water molecules have been replaced? These questions have perplexed philosophers for millennia, revealing profound tensions between our intuitive understanding of permanence and the reality of constant change. Consider the ancient ship of Theseus paradox. Imagine a wooden ship whose planks are gradually replaced as they rot. Eventually, every original piece has been substituted. Is it still the same ship? Our intuition pulls us in conflicting directions. On one hand, it occupies the same space and serves the same function. On the other, not a splinter of its original material remains. The paradox deepens if we imagine the removed planks being reassembled into a second ship. Which vessel, if either, is the authentic ship of Theseus? This puzzle illuminates the tension between two fundamental approaches to identity. The first emphasizes material continuity. Something remains the same only if its physical components persist. The second prioritizes formal or functional continuity. What matters is the pattern, structure, or role something plays, regardless of material substitutions. Neither approach fully satisfies our intuitions about identity. Personal identity compounds this paradox. Consider that nearly every cell in your body has been replaced since childhood. The atoms constituting your physical form are in constant flux. Materially speaking, you are not the same person who existed a decade ago. Yet we intuitively resist this conclusion. Something about you persists through these physical transformations. John Locke proposed that personal identity hinges on psychological continuity, the chain of memories, beliefs, and character traits that connect your present self to your past. You remain the same person because today's consciousness flows from yesterday's. But this view generates its own paradoxes. Memory is notoriously fallible. We forget vast swaths of our past experiences. If identity depends on memory, do these lapses create gaps in our existence? The philosopher Derek Parfit explored an even more troubling scenario. What if your consciousness could be duplicated? Imagine a teleportation device that scans your body molecule by molecule, transmits this information to Mars, and reconstructs an identical copy there while destroying the original. Would this Mars-dwelling duplicate be you? It would have all your memories, personality traits, and physical characteristics. From the duplicate's perspective, it simply stepped into a chamber on Earth and emerged on Mars. Yet something seems deeply unsettling about equating this copy with the original you. Buddhism offers a radically different perspective on identity, suggesting the self is fundamentally an illusion. The doctrine of anatta, no self, proposes that what we perceive as a stable self is actually a collection of constantly changing physical and mental processes with no permanent essence. Our attachment to a fixed identity generates suffering, while recognizing the fluid nature of existence brings liberation. This view harmonizes with contemporary neuroscience, which reveals consciousness as an emergent property of countless neural interactions rather than a unified entity. Western philosopher David Hume arrived at a similar conclusion through different reasoning. Introspecting deeply, he could find no persistent self beyond a bundle of perceptions, thoughts, and sensations in constant flux. He famously wrote, "When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble on some particular perception or other. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception." The paradox of identity extends beyond individuals to social entities. Consider nations, corporations, or universities that persist for centuries, despite complete turnover in their constituent members. Oxford University has existed for nearly a millennium, yet no student or professor has remained throughout its history. What makes it the same institution? Its continuity seems to reside in its social role, traditions, and legal status rather than any material component. modern technology adds new dimensions to these ancient puzzles. If your consciousness could be uploaded to a computer, would the digital simulation be you? If your brain were gradually replaced with artificial neurons, at what point, if ever, would you cease to be yourself? These questions are no longer merely philosophical thought experiments but increasingly plausible future scenarios. The paradox of identity ultimately reveals the limitations of our conceptual frameworks. We instinctively categorize the world into discrete, persistent objects, yet reality consists of processes in constant flux. Our language struggles to capture this tension. We lack vocabulary for entities that are neither entirely the same nor entirely different across time. Perhaps identity is better understood not as an all-or-nothing property, but as a matter of degree. The river today resembles yesterday's river to a high degree, just as you bear strong connections to your childhood self without being identical. This perspective acknowledges both continuity and change without demanding absolute permanence. The philosopher Heraclitus observed that one cannot step into the same river twice, as fresh waters are constantly flowing. Yet we still name rivers, recognizing some form of continuity amid constant change. Similarly, we navigate our lives treating ourselves and others as persistent entities while acknowledging growth and transformation. The paradox of identity, thus, invites us to hold seemingly contradictory ideas in tension. We are both the same and not the same across time. Neither absolute permanence nor complete discontinuity captures our lived experience. In this middle path lies wisdom, recognizing the conventional utility of identity while remaining aware of its ultimate fluidity. The paradox doesn't demand resolution so much as appreciation, offering a window into the subtle complexity of existence itself. As you drift towards sleep, consider that the person who awakens tomorrow will both be and not be the person closing their eyes tonight. In this paradoxical space between sameness and difference, between being and becoming, we find not just philosophical puzzlement, but the very essence of our temporal existence. The experience machine. Imagine a machine so advanced that once connected, it could stimulate your brain to provide any experience you desire. This machine would create a perfect simulation of reality, indistinguishable from genuine experience. You could scale Mount Everest, fall deeply in love, write a masterpiece, or experience perfect happiness, all while floating in a tank, electrodes attached to your brain. The catch? You must remain connected for the rest of your life, abandoning the actual world for this simulated paradise. Would you plug in? This thought experiment, conceived by philosopher Robert Nozick in his 1974 work, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, presents one of philosophy's most compelling challenges to hedonism and utilitarianism. At its core, the experience machine forces us to confront fundamental questions about what makes a good life and what we truly value beyond mere pleasant experiences. The utilitarian perspective, particularly in its classical form, suggests that pleasure and the absence of pain constitute the ultimate good. If this view is correct, plugging into the experience machine seems rational. After all, the machine guarantees maximal pleasure tailored precisely to your preferences. No real-world existence could compete with this perfectly calibrated stream of bliss. The utilitarian calculation appears straightforward. More pleasure is better, and the machine delivers pleasure in its purest form. Yet most people, when confronted with this scenario, hesitate or outright refuse to connect. This widespread reluctance reveals something profound about human values. We seem to care about more than just the content of our experiences. We care about their relationship to reality. Nozick identifies three main concerns that might explain our resistance. We want to do certain things, not just have the experience of doing them. We want to be a certain kind of person, not merely experience being that person. And we desire contact with a reality deeper than any artificial simulation. Consider an accomplished musician who has devoted years to mastering her instrument. The experience machine could give her the identical subjective experience of playing flawlessly before an adoring audience. Yet something seems lost: the actual accomplishment, the genuine interaction with an audience, the authentic mastery of a difficult skill. The simulation offers the feelings without the achievement, the experience without the reality. Similarly, relationships in the experience machine would be mere shadows. The machine might simulate a profound connection with another person, but that person would not actually exist. Your spouse's love, your child's admiration, your friend's loyalty, all would be elaborate fictions generated by algorithms. Many philosophers argue that authentic relationships with autonomous beings possess value beyond the pleasant experiences they provide. We want to be truly loved, not merely to experience the sensation of being loved. Bernard Williams expanded this critique through his concept of ground projects, the deep commitments that give our lives meaning and shape our identities. These projects often involve engaging with the real world in ways the experience machine cannot replicate. The environmental activist doesn't merely want to feel she's saving the planet. She wants to actually preserve ecosystems. The physician doesn't just desire the sensation of healing patients. She wants to truly alleviate suffering. The experience machine offers counterfeits of these goods, convincing forgeries that might feel identical but lack the connection to reality that gives them meaning. Yet proponents of the experience machine offer compelling counterarguments. They question whether our intuitive aversion to the machine reflects coherent philosophical reasoning or merely status quo bias. After all, how do we know our current experiences connect to reality in any meaningful way? Perhaps we already exist, in something like an experience machine, a simulation or dream from which we irrationally resist awakening. The philosopher Hilary Putnam's brain in a vat scenario and science fiction works like The Matrix explore this unsettling possibility. Furthermore, experience machine advocates question the coherence of valuing reality over experience. Since all our interactions with reality are mediated through experience, what basis do we have for preferring one set of experiences, those supposedly connected to reality, over another, those generated by the machine? If the experiences are subjectively identical, what makes one set more valuable than the other? The debate intensifies when we consider real-world technologies that increasingly resemble primitive experience machines. Virtual reality, augmented reality, and immersive digital environments offer ever more convincing simulations. Social media platforms already provide mediated approximations of human connection. As these technologies advance, the theoretical questions raised by Nozick's thought experiment become practical ethical dilemmas. At what point does our engagement with virtual experiences detract from authentic living? When does the pursuit of pleasurable experiences undermine deeper values? The experience machine also intersects with questions about mental enhancement and modification. Antidepressants, mood stabilizers, and potential future neurological interventions might be seen as limited versions of the machine, technologies that modify our subjective experience while potentially disconnecting us from reality. Are we surrendering authenticity for comfort when we chemically alter our emotional responses? Eastern philosophical traditions offer another perspective on this dilemma. Buddhist thought, for instance, might question the fundamental premise that experiences, whether machine-generated or real, constitute a self that persists through time. If the self is illusory, perhaps the distinction between authentic and simulated experiences loses significance. The Taoist emphasis on naturalness, meanwhile, might suggest that the artificial experiences of the machine inherently lack the virtue of spontaneity and harmonious flow with nature. The experience machine paradox ultimately reveals a tension between different philosophical approaches to value. Consequentialist theories that focus solely on the quality of experiences struggle to explain why reality matters. Virtue ethics, which emphasizes the development of character through genuine, Action offers stronger resistance to the machine's allure. Deontological frameworks might question whether connecting to the machine respects our rational nature, or treats ourselves merely as vessels for pleasure. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the most profound insight of the experience. Machine paradox is not a definitive answer, but the recognition of complexity in what we value. We want lives that feel good from the inside, but also connect meaningfully with a world beyond ourselves. We desire both happiness and truth, both pleasure and authenticity. The tension between these values defines the human condition, a tension no machine, however advanced, can fully resolve. The Munchausen trilemma. Deep in the foundations of epistemology lies a puzzle so fundamental that it threatens to undermine our most basic assumptions about knowledge and justification. Named after Baron Munchausen, the legendary nobleman, who claimed to have pulled himself out of a swamp by his own hair, the Munchausen trilemma represents a profound challenge to our quest for certain knowledge. It suggests that whenever we attempt to provide ultimate justification for our beliefs, we inevitably encounter one of three equally problematic options: an infinite regress, a circular argument, or arbitrary assumptions. Consider how we typically justify our beliefs. When asked why you believe something, you offer reasons. But those reasons themselves require justification, which leads to further reasons, and so on. The trilemma emerges when we follow this chain of reasoning to its logical conclusion. We must either continue providing justifications forever, infinite, regress, eventually circle back to earlier claims, circularity, or stop at some point and declare certain beliefs as self-evident or axiomatic, foundationalism. None of these options seems entirely satisfactory, yet we cannot escape choosing among them. The first horn of the trilemma, infinite regress, occurs when each justification requires further justification without end. Imagine someone asking, how you know that Paris is the capital of France? You might respond that you read it in a textbook. But how do you know the textbook is reliable? Because it was written by experts. How do you know the experts are trustworthy? Because they studied at prestigious universities. How do you know these universities maintain high standards? The questioning could continue indefinitely, with each answer spawning new questions about its justification. This infinite chain of reasoning presents an obvious problem. If knowledge requires complete justification, and complete justification requires an infinite series of reasons, then it seems impossible for finite beings like ourselves to possess genuine knowledge. We can never complete an infinite series of justifications, so our knowledge claims would always remain provisional and incomplete. The second horn, circularity, attempts to avoid the infinite regress by eventually circling back to earlier claims in the justification chain. In this approach, A is justified by B, which is justified by C, which is ultimately justified by A. While this resolves the problem of infinite regress, it introduces a different logical flaw. The justification becomes self-referential and fails to provide independent support for the original claim. It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own bootstraps, a logical impossibility. Defenders of coherentism, however, argue that circular reasoning isn't necessarily vicious if the circle is sufficiently large and interconnected. They suggest that knowledge doesn't require a linear chain of justification, but rather exists as a web of mutually supporting beliefs. The coherence of the entire system provides justification for individual beliefs within it. Just as a spider's web gains strength from its interconnected structure, our beliefs gain justification from their consistent relationships with other beliefs. The third horn, foundationalism, stops the chain of justification by postulating certain basic beliefs that require no further justification. These foundational beliefs are considered self-evident, indubitable, or directly apprehended. In Western philosophy, candidates for such foundations have included sense perceptions, logical axioms, mathematical intuitions, or, in René Descartes' famous case, the certainty of one's own existence. I think, therefore I am. Foundationalists argue that these basic beliefs are justified not by other beliefs, but by their inherent credibility. Critics of foundationalism contend that this approach merely disguises arbitrary assumptions as self-evident truths. What appears indubitable to one person might seem questionable to another. Furthermore, even supposedly self-evident beliefs often implicitly rely on cultural, linguistic, or conceptual frameworks that themselves require justification. The foundationalist must explain why some beliefs deserve special status as exempt from the normal requirements of justification. The Munchausen trilemma has ancient roots, with versions appearing in Pyrrhonian skepticism from ancient Greece. Agrippa, a skeptic philosopher from the 1st century CE, formulated 5 modes or tropes of skepticism, 3 of which correspond closely to our modern trilemma. His conclusion was radical, that we should suspend judgment about all matters, since no belief can be ultimately justified. This extreme skepticism has troubled philosophers ever since, as it threatens to undermine not just philosophical knowledge, but scientific, moral, and everyday knowledge as well. Various philosophical traditions have developed responses to this trilemma. Pragmatists like Charles Sanders Peirce and William James sidestepped the issue by redefining knowledge in terms of practical consequences rather than absolute justification. Knowledge becomes a tool for navigating reality successfully, rather than a mirror perfectly reflecting an objective world. What matters is not whether our beliefs have ultimate foundations, but whether they help us predict and control our experiences. Ludwig Wittgenstein approached the problem from a different angle, suggesting that certain beliefs function as the hinges upon which our inquiries turn. These hinge propositions aren't exactly foundational in the traditional sense, but represent the implicit background against which our questioning and justifying practices make sense. We don't justify them, because they constitute the framework within which justification itself operates. For instance, the belief that the world wasn't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age isn't something we typically justify. It's part of our basic picture of reality. Contemporary epistemologists like Susan Haack have proposed found-herentism, which combines elements of both foundationalism and coherentism. In this view, justification involves both the support of basic experiences, addressing the foundationalist concern, and mutual reinforcement among beliefs, addressing the coherentist insight. Knowledge resembles a crossword puzzle, where answers gain support both from the clues, analogous to experience, and from their fit with other answers, analogous to coherence with other beliefs. The trilemma also connects to broader questions about the limits of human rationality. Some philosophers argue that the very demand for ultimate justification reflects a misunderstanding of knowledge. Perhaps knowledge doesn't require certainty but merely adequate justification relative to specific contexts and purposes. This more modest conception of knowledge acknowledges our cognitive limitations, while preserving the practical utility of our justified beliefs. Eastern philosophical traditions offer yet another perspective. Zen Buddhism, for instance, recognizes the limitations of discursive reasoning and seeks direct, non-conceptual insight that transcends the subject-object duality underlying the trilemma. Rather than attempting to resolve the logical paradox, Zen suggests a shift in consciousness that renders the problem itself irrelevant. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the Munchausen trilemma doesn't demonstrate that knowledge is impossible, but rather that our conception of knowledge needs refinement. The pursuit of absolutely certain foundations might be a philosophical mirage, an impossible ideal that distracts from the practical reality of how knowledge actually functions in human life. We navigate the world not with perfect justifications, but with provisional beliefs that help us survive and thrive. The trilemma reveals not the bankruptcy of knowledge, but the inherent limitations and humility required in the human quest to understand our world. The problem of evil, Among philosophy's most enduring puzzles stands the problem of evil, a profound challenge to theistic belief that has perplexed theologians, philosophers, and ordinary believers for millennia. In its simplest form, it poses a seemingly straightforward question. If God exists and is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good, why does evil exist in our world? The logical tension emerges from three propositions that, when taken together, appear contradictory: God's omnipotence, unlimited power; God's omnibenevolence, perfect goodness; and the undeniable presence of suffering and moral evil throughout human experience. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus reportedly formulated an early version of this dilemma. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? This elegant statement captures the core logical problem that has resonated through centuries of philosophical and theological discourse. The problem of evil actually encompasses two distinct but related challenges. The logical problem argues that the existence of any evil whatsoever is incompatible with an omnipotent and omnibenevolent deity. Even a single instance of seemingly unnecessary suffering, a child dying of cancer, an earthquake claiming innocent lives, creates an apparent contradiction that threatens to unravel traditional conceptions of God. The evidential problem, meanwhile, suggests that the quantity and distribution of suffering in our world, while perhaps not logically contradicting God's existence, makes it highly improbable. The world we observe, with its seemingly gratuitous suffering, appears far more consistent with indifference or absence of divine guidance than with the loving providence described in religious traditions. Theistic responses to this challenge have generated some of history's most sophisticated theological and philosophical reasoning. The free will defense, most famously articulated by philosopher Alvin Plantinga, argues that even an omnipotent God cannot create beings with genuine freedom without the possibility they might choose evil. God's goodness is expressed in granting humans moral autonomy, even knowing this freedom would be misused. On this view, much of the world's suffering stems from human choices, and eliminating this suffering would require eliminating free will itself, a cure worse than the disease. Critics counter that this defense, while potentially accounting for moral evil, cruelty, injustice, fails to explain natural evil, diseases, earthquakes, predation, that seems unconnected to human choice. Soul-making theodicies, developed by thinkers like Irenaeus and John Hick, propose that suffering serves a developmental purpose. Just as muscles grow stronger through resistance, virtues like compassion, courage, and perseverance can only develop through encountering adversity. The world, on this view, is not designed primarily for pleasure, but for spiritual growth. God permits suffering not out of cruelty but as a necessary component of an environment conducive to moral and spiritual development. Critics respond that this approach fails to account for the excessive nature of much suffering. Do infants who die painfully really benefit from soul-making opportunities? Moreover, couldn't an omnipotent deity design creatures who develop virtues without requiring extreme suffering? The skeptical theist position takes a different approach, questioning our ability to judge what constitutes gratuitous evil. Human cognitive limitations prevent us from perceiving all the ripple effects of events across time and space. What appears pointless to us might serve purposes beyond our comprehension, just as a child might not understand why a parent permits the pain of a vaccination. Critics argue this position verges on unfalsifiability, if any apparent counter-evidence can be dismissed by appealing to unknown divine purposes. Has the original claim about God's nature been rendered meaningless? Some theologians embrace a more radical response through process theology, which reconceives divine attributes rather then attempting to reconcile traditional attributes with observed evil. Process theologians like Charles Hartshorne suggest God's power lies not in unilateral control, but in persuasive influence. God suffers with creation, working within natural processes to bring about good, but cannot simply override these processes, without contradicting divine nature. This view preserves divine goodness at the expense of traditional omnipotence, arguing that even God must respect the legitimate causal powers of creatures. The privation theory, developed by Augustine and refined by Aquinas, approaches evil not as a positive force, but as a privation or absence of good. Analogous to how coldness represents the absence of heat or darkness, the absence of light. Evil has no independent existence, but represents distortions or deficiencies in otherwise good things. This subtle metaphysical position doesn't directly solve the problem of why God permits privations, but reframes the conceptual landscape in which the problem is situated. Eastern religious traditions offer alternative perspectives. Buddhism sidesteps the theistic problem by not positing an omnipotent creator, instead addressing suffering through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Hindu conceptions of karma suggest suffering reflects cosmic justice across multiple lifetimes, while acknowledging the ultimately illusory nature of perceived reality. These traditions remind us that the problem of evil arises specifically within frameworks that combine particular conceptions of divinity with observations about suffering. Contemporary analytical philosophers have brought new precision to this ancient debate. Philosophers like William Rowe have crafted careful arguments based on apparently pointless suffering in nature, such as a fawn dying slowly in a forest fire, far from human observation. Peter van Inwagen has explored how the apparent randomness of suffering might actually be necessary for human knowledge and action within a divinely created world. Marilyn Adams has investigated whether the intimate divine presence promised in religious traditions might constitute a good so overwhelming that it ultimately defeats, though does not eliminate or explain away, even the worst earthly suffering. The problem of evil extends beyond abstract philosophical argumentation to the lived experience of believers confronting personal tragedy. The biblical book of Job portrays this existential dimension as a righteous man questions divine justice amid devastating losses. Job receives no philosophical explanation for his suffering, only an overwhelming encounter with divine mystery. This narrative suggests that intellectual solutions alone may not satisfy the deep human need to make meaning of suffering. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the most profound aspect of the problem of evil is not its logical structure, but its universal resonance. Every conscious being grapples with suffering's meaning. The philosophical problem articulates in precise terms what we all intuitively feel when witnessing or experiencing pain: a profound tension between our moral intuitions and the world we observe. Whether one ultimately finds theistic responses convincing or not, engaging with this problem thoughtfully reflects our uniquely human capacity to question not just how the world is, but how it ought to be, and whether those two realities can ever be reconciled. The unexpected gift. Paradox. Imagine a friend tells you they will give you a gift sometime next week, but it will come as a surprise. You won't be able to predict on which day the gift will arrive. This seemingly innocent promise contains within it a fascinating logical puzzle that has intrigued philosophers for decades, bearing structural similarities to the more famous surprise examination paradox, or unexpected hanging paradox. The paradox unfolds through a chain of deductive reasoning that appears sound at each step, yet leads to a contradictory conclusion. Let's begin by examining the scenario carefully. Your friend has made two claims. First, that you will receive a gift on one of the 7 days next week. Second, that the gift's arrival will be unexpected. You won't know in advance which day it will come. The paradoxical reasoning begins at the end of the week and works backward. You might think, if the gift hasn't arrived by Saturday, then it must come on Sunday. But if I know it must come on Sunday, then its arrival wouldn't be unexpected. Since my friend promised an unexpected gift, it cannot come on Sunday. Having ruled out Sunday, you then consider Saturday. If the gift hasn't arrived by Friday and I've already ruled out Sunday, then it must come on Saturday. But then I would expect it on Saturday, contradicting the condition that it be unexpected. So it cannot come on Saturday either. This same reasoning continues backward through the week until you've ruled out every possible day. The logical conclusion seems inescapable. The promised unexpected gift cannot be given on any day. Yet this creates a paradox. Your friend's apparently straightforward promise seems logically impossible to fulfill. What makes this paradox so intriguing is that it emerges from seemingly uncontroversial premises using standard logical reasoning. The contradiction suggests either a flaw in our reasoning or some deeper complexity in the concepts involved. Philosophers have proposed various solutions, each highlighting different aspects of the logical tensions at play. One approach questions the backward induction reasoning itself. This solution suggests that while the reasoning appears valid at each step, the entire process commits a subtle error. The key insight is that knowledge changes over time. When you believe the gift could come on any day, the promise of surprise is coherent. The act of reasoning through the days and ruling them out changes your knowledge state, thereby altering the conditions under which surprise is possible. This creates a self-referential loop that undermines the entire chain of reasoning. A different solution focuses on the nature of knowledge and expectation. Perhaps there's a critical distinction between knowing the gift will come on a specific day and merely having strong evidence it will come then. Even if logical deduction suggests the gift must come on, say, Wednesday, you might not achieve the level of certainty required for genuine knowledge. Without absolute certainty, the element of surprise remains intact, and the paradox dissolves. Some philosophers view the paradox as revealing fundamental limitations in our ability to reason about knowledge and time. Our logic struggles with self-referential statements. In this case, a prediction about our future knowledge state that itself affects that knowledge state. The paradox might indicate not an error in our reasoning, but a boundary beyond which classical logic cannot cleanly operate. A particularly fascinating dimension of this paradox is how it illuminates the relationship between knowledge, time, and surprise. Surprise requires ignorance. We can only be surprised by what we don't expect, yet reasoning and prediction attempt to eliminate ignorance. The paradox reveals a tension between our capacity for logical foresight and our desire for unexpected experiences. In everyday life, we navigate this tension effortlessly. Despite our capacity for prediction, we regularly experience genuine surprise. Even when we know a gift is coming sometime during the holidays, the moment of receiving it can still delight us with its unexpectedness. This suggests our lived experience accommodates contradictions that formal logic struggles to resolve. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein might characterize this as a case where ordinary language leads us into philosophical confusion. In everyday conversation, statements about unexpected gifts function perfectly well. The paradox emerges only when we attempt to formalize these concepts with excessive precision, imposing strict logical constraints on inherently fuzzy concepts like surprise and expectation. The paradox also intersects with questions about free will and determinism. If logical deduction can predict when the gift must come, does your friend truly have the freedom to surprise you? Or does the very nature of surprise require a kind of causal openness that defies complete predictability? Perhaps genuine surprise can exist only in a world with some inherent unpredictability, or in a mind incapable of perfect deduction. Eastern philosophical traditions offer another perspective. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on embracing paradox, rather than resolving it, might suggest that the unexpected gift paradox reveals the limitations of dualistic thinking. Rather than seeking a solution that preserves classical logic, we might embrace the paradox as pointing toward a higher truth beyond conceptual thought. Epistemological approaches remind us that knowledge involves not just logical implication, but justification and belief. Even if you deduce the gift must come on Wednesday, you might doubt your own reasoning. This self-doubt preserves the possibility of surprise. Indeed, the paradox itself might undermine your confidence in deducing when the gift will arrive, thereby restoring the conditions for surprise. The paradox bears relevance to ethics and gift-giving practices as well. Gifts occupy a special place in human relationships, precisely because they combine intentionality with an element of surprise. A completely predictable gift loses some of its power to delight and connect. Yet a totally random gift, detached from the recipient's desires or the giver's intentions, also fails to achieve the ideal of gift-giving. The perfect gift navigates between these extremes, thoughtfully chosen, yet still capable of surprising. In a broader sense, the unexpected gift paradox symbolizes the human desire to reconcile predictability with novelty, security with surprise. We crave the comfort of knowing what comes next, yet simultaneously yearn for experiences that transcend our expectations. This fundamental tension shapes not just our approach to gifts, but our orientation toward the future itself. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the most valuable gifts in life embody this paradox. They arrive in ways we could never have predicted, yet somehow feel perfectly timed. The logical contradiction at the heart of the unexpected gift may be not a problem to solve, but a mystery to embrace, reminding us that life's greatest joys often transcend the boundaries of our predictive reasoning. The drinker's paradox. In the landscape of philosophical logic, certain puzzles stand out for their deceptive simplicity and profound implications. The drinker's paradox is one such gem, a theorem that seems intuitively absurd yet can be proven using standard logical principles. Often stated in a light-hearted manner involving a tavern, this paradox offers a window into the sometimes counterintuitive nature of classical logic and the philosophical questions it raises. The paradox is typically formulated as follows. In any pub, there exists at least one person, such that if that person is drinking, then everyone in the pub is drinking. At first glance, this statement appears dubious. How could one person's drinking habits possibly guarantee anything about everyone else's? It seems to suggest a mysterious causal connection between one patron and the rest. Yet this seemingly implausible claim can be rigorously proven using fundamental principles of classical logic. The standard proof relies on the law of excluded middle, which states that for any proposition P, either P is true or its negation is true. There is no middle ground. Consider two possible scenarios in our pub. Either everyone is drinking, or at least one person is not drinking. If everyone is drinking, then the statement, if person X is drinking, then everyone is drinking, is true for any person X in the pub, since the consequent everyone is drinking is true regardless of the antecedent. If, on the other hand, at least, one person is not drinking, call this person Y. Then for Y, the statement, if Y is drinking, then everyone is drinking is true, because the antecedent Y is drinking is false. In propositional logic, any conditional statement with a false antecedent is considered vacuously true, a principle known as ex falso quodlibet, or from falsehood, anything follows. Since we've covered all possible scenarios, either everyone drinks or someone doesn't, and in each scenario we've identified at least one person satisfying our condition, the theorem is proven. In a more formal notation, we've shown that for any pub P, there exists some person X in P, such that dx, yp dy, where dz means z is drinking. What makes this paradox so fascinating is not just the unexpected conclusion, but the questions it raises about the nature of logical implication. The material conditional in classical logic, represented by if A then B or A B, has a specific truth table. It's false only when A is true, and B is false, and true in all other cases. This definition gives rise to some counterintuitive results, of which the drinker's paradox is a prime example. The paradox highlights the distinction between the logical conditional and our everyday understanding of causation or relevance. In ordinary language, when we say, if A, then B, we typically imply some meaningful connection between A and B. The logical conditional, however, makes no such requirement. It's concerned solely with the truth values of its components, not with any semantic relationship between them. Some philosophers and logicians have found this disconnect troubling. Relevance logicians, for instance, argue that a proper logical system should require some meaningful connection between the antecedent and consequent of a conditional statement. In relevance logic, the principle that a false antecedent makes a conditional automatically true is rejected, which would invalidate the standard proof of the drinker's paradox. Intuitionistic logic takes issue with another aspect of the proof, the uncritical use of the law of excluded middle. Intuitionists argue that mathematical truths must be constructible or provable, not merely deduced from the impossibility of their negation. From an intuitionistic perspective, to prove the drinker's paradox, we would need to explicitly identify a specific person satisfying the condition, not merely argue that such a person must exist by process of elimination. Beyond these technical considerations lies a deeper philosophical question. What does this paradox reveal about the relationship between formal logical systems and reality? The drinker's paradox doesn't seem to tell us anything useful about actual pubs or drinking behavior. Does this suggest that classical logic, despite its mathematical elegance, is an imperfect tool for reasoning about the real world? The paradox shares conceptual space with other logical curiosities, like the barber paradox or the raven paradox, all of which highlight potential mismatches between formal logic and intuitive reasoning. These puzzles remind us that the map, our logical systems, is not the territory, reality, even as they demonstrate the power and precision of formal reasoning. Some philosophers defend classical logic by emphasizing that the drinker's paradox, properly understood, isn't really paradoxical at all. It's a theorem that follows validly from accepted principles. The apparent absurdity arises from conflating logical implication with causal or evidential relationships. Once we accept that material implication doesn't capture all the nuances of everyday conditional statements, the theorem becomes less troubling, if still surprising. The paradox also illuminates the nature of existence proofs in mathematics. The standard proof is non-constructive. It establishes that a certain person must exist without providing a method for identifying who that person is. This distinction between knowing that something exists and knowing what exactly it is has been a significant point of contention in the philosophy of mathematics, particularly between Platonists who accept abstract mathematical entities as having an independent existence, and constructivists who insist on explicit procedures for finding mathematical objects. A further dimension of the paradox concerns quantifier order. The precise formulation of the theorem states, for any pub, there exists a person such that if that person is drinking, then everyone in the pub is drinking. If we were to reverse the quantifiers to, there exists a person such that for any pub, if that person is in the pub and drinking, then everyone in that pub is drinking, we would get a much stronger and clearly false claim about a universal drinking influencer who affects every pub they enter. This sensitivity to quantifier order reminds us of the importance of precise formulation in logic, and the ease with which subtle shifts in language can transform reasonable statements into absurd ones. It serves as a caution against casual translations between natural language and formal logical systems. The drinker's paradox, like many logical puzzles, doesn't demand resolution so much as reflection. It invites us to examine our intuitions about logic, the limitations of formal systems, and the complex relationship between abstract reasoning and practical understanding. Whether we ultimately side with classical logicians, relevance theorists, intuitionists, or adopt some integrated perspective, engaging with such paradoxes enriches our philosophical toolkit and deepens our appreciation for the subtleties of human reasoning. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the value of the drinker's paradox lies not in its literal application to pubs, but in how it challenges us to refine our understanding of logical implication and its relationship to the meaningful connections we perceive in the world around us. In the space between formal validity and intuitive plausibility, we discover not just the boundaries of our logical systems, but the contours of thought itself. The island of truth-tellers and liars. Imagine an island inhabited by two types of people, those who always tell the truth and those who always lie. There are no middle grounders who sometimes tell the truth and sometimes lie. Each islander is consistently honest or consistently dishonest. In this seemingly simple setup lies a rich domain for logical exploration that has fascinated philosophers, logicians, and puzzle enthusiasts for generations. The truth-tellers and liars puzzle family offers a window into the nature of truth, the structure of logical reasoning, and the fascinating ways language can fold back upon itself. The canonical puzzle in this tradition presents a scenario where you stand at a fork in the road, needing to determine which path leads to your destination. A native islander stands nearby, but you don't know whether this person is a truth-teller or a liar. Moreover, you may ask only one yes or no question to determine the correct path. What single question would guarantee that you discover the right way? The elegant solution requires a self-referential question that works regardless of whether you're addressing a truth-teller or a liar. Would you tell me that the left path is the correct one? If the left path truly leads to your destination, and you're speaking to a truth-teller, they would answer yes. If the left path is correct but you're addressing a liar, they would answer no, lying about what they would say. If the right path is correct, and you're speaking to a truth-teller, they would answer no. And if the right path is correct but you're addressing a liar, they would answer yes, lying about what they would say. In all cases, yes indicates the left path is correct, and no indicates the right path is correct. This solution demonstrates a profound logical principle. By embedding one layer of reported speech within your question, would you tell me that? You create a structure that neutralizes the fundamental uncertainty about your informant's truthfulness. The liar must lie about what they would say, effectively creating a double negative that yields a truth. This manipulation of the logical structure of language reveals how we can extract reliable information even from sources we cannot trust directly. The philosophical significance of these puzzles extends far beyond mere entertainment. They form part of a tradition dating back to ancient Greece, where the liar paradox, attributed to Epimenides of Crete, who supposedly declared all Cretans are liars, challenged fundamental assumptions about truth and self-reference. If Epimenides is telling the truth, then his statement is false, since he himself is a Cretan asserting that all Cretans lie. But if his statement is false, then not all Cretans are liars, which means some Cretans tell the truth, possibly including Epimenides himself, making his statement potentially true. This circular reasoning creates an irresolvable paradox that has troubled logicians for millennia. The truth-teller and liar puzzles represent a more tractable variation of this ancient paradox. By stipulating that each islander is consistently either a truth-teller or a liar, these puzzles avoid the infinite regress of the liar paradox while still exploring the logical complexities of truth, falsehood, and self-reference. They provide a controlled environment for examining how logical reasoning can navigate uncertainty and extract reliable conclusions from potentially unreliable sources. These puzzles also illuminate important distinctions in logical systems. Classical logic operates on the principle of bivalence. Every proposition is either true or false, with no middle ground. The island's strict division between truth-tellers and liars mirrors this bivalent structure. However, many logicians and Philosophers have questioned whether this binary approach adequately captures the complexities of truth in natural language and human reasoning. Alternative logical systems like fuzzy logic, which allows for degrees of truth, or intuitionistic logic, which rejects the law of excluded middle, suggest different frameworks for understanding truth that might dissolve or transform these puzzles. Raymond Smullyan, a mathematician, logician, and puzzle creator, significantly expanded the genre with his books featuring knights, truth-tellers, and knaves, liars. Smullyan's puzzles escalate in complexity, introducing characters who alternate between truth and lies according to specific patterns, or who make statements of such logical intricacy that determining their identity requires sophisticated deductive techniques. Through these increasingly elaborate scenarios, Smullyan demonstrates how logical principles can be applied to extract definite conclusions from apparently contradictory or ambiguous information. The island puzzles connect to broader philosophical questions about knowledge and certainty. How can we know anything if our informants might be unreliable? This question parallels Descartes' methodological skepticism, where he questioned how knowledge could be built on potentially deceptive sense experiences. Just as the puzzle solver must find questions that yield trustworthy answers regardless of the islander's truthfulness, Descartes sought foundations for knowledge that would remain solid, even if an evil demon were systematically deceiving him. These puzzles also resonate with epistemological theories about testimony. Much of what we claim to know comes not from direct observation, but from the testimony of others. But how can we distinguish reliable from unreliable testimony? The truth-teller and liar puzzles present this question in stark form, knowing whether to trust an informant whose reliability is unknown, and demonstrate logical strategies for extracting truth even from potentially deceptive sources. A more contemporary context, these puzzles relate to issues of misinformation and algorithmic truth assessment. In a world where digital information flows from countless sources of varying reliability, the logical principles underlying truth-teller and liar puzzles offer conceptual tools for navigating uncertainty. The puzzle's solution strategy, finding ways to cross-check information or structure queries to neutralize potential deception, parallels approaches used in fact-checking systems and information verification protocols. The island puzzles also exemplify what philosophers call closed-world reasoning, reasoning within a system where all relevant facts are stipulated and known. The puzzle solver knows the rules governing the islander's behavior. They always tell the truth or always lie, and must reason deductively from these premises. This contrasts with open-world reasoning required in real-life situations, where unstated factors might influence outcomes, and where inductive rather than purely deductive reasoning is often necessary. The satisfaction we derive from solving these puzzles may partly stem from their refreshing clarity compared to the messy, uncertain reasoning required in everyday life. Beyond their philosophical dimensions, truth-teller and liar puzzles demonstrate the self-referential capabilities of language, how statements can refer to themselves or to the truthfulness of other statements. This linguistic recursion creates logical structures of remarkable complexity, despite using relatively simple components. In this sense, these puzzles exemplify how recursive structures in language and thought can generate complexity from simplicity, a principle that appears across domains from computer programming to cognitive science. As you drift toward sleep, consider that perhaps the enduring appeal of the island of truth-tellers and liars lies not just in the intellectual challenge it presents, but in how it mirrors our everyday struggle to discern truth in a world of mixed messages and uncertain sources. Through the rigorous application of logical principles, these puzzles suggest that even in the face of systematic deception, careful reasoning can still illuminate a path to truth, a comforting thought in an age of information overload and competing claims to knowledge.